Hi, my name is Jake, and I am a bookish drummer. So this will be my top 10 Stephen King novellas, my all-time favorite Stephen King novellas. And of course, like with the rest of the episodes, I originally planned on just talking about like 3 or 4 per episode, right? So my top 10 was going to be about like 3 episodes. But I did a poll up on my community page on my YouTube channel, and apparently people wanted just a straight up top 10 list, top 10 video. So that's what I'm bringing y'all. So get ready for me to gush about my favorite Stephen King novellas. And of course, down below, I'll leave a playlist for the rest of my novella ranking series. I believe I ranked 33 of his novellas, and I think this is episode 8 or so. Can't remember, but I'll be sure to leave down the link for all the rest of the episodes. So if, in case you guys haven't watched it, you can go back and check out and see which ones I ranked like at the bottom, and then, you know, which ones get better and better for me. And then of course, today, let's just go ahead and jump right into it, because I've got 10 awesome Stephen King novellas to rank. So enough of the preamble. Let's go ahead and jump right into it. All right, so for number 10, this was the one I was kind of debating whether I wanted to put it in the top 10 or if I wanted to put A Very Tight Place, which was number 11 originally on my top 10 list. I'm kind of debating now whether which one is really should be in the top 10, but for now, I'm going to go with this one. And it's still a terrific novella, and it's also in the same collection as A Very Tight Place. So without further ado, number 10 is In. Just the letter N. It's just a bonkers Stephen King novella. If you've read the story before, you know exactly why it's bonkers and why it's nuts. But if you haven't read it before, it's kind of hard to like say what it's about or like where the story goes, because it's definitely one of those novellas, one of those stories where it's best to go into it knowing as little as possible. And so it's kind of hard to talk about, really. But the kind of the general topic for the story is OCD, right? Obsession compulsive disorder, and what people go through when they kind of just get obsessed with something. And for the person in this story, it's all about numbers. And I can't really relate to being OCD. And it's funny because like a lot of people will say that they are OCD, but really they're just clean freaks, right? Like they need everything to be clean. But really OCD is more about just getting obsessed with an idea. And like for instance, this guy is obsessed with numbers, and just everything in his life revolves around numbers, and he's not really able to cope with everything very well, and his life is just very dysfunctional because of it. And I still remember the first time I read this, I had so much fun with it because I had no idea where the story was going to go. And it was so much fun, like learning about this guy and his OCD, and then like figuring out like what exactly he was doing and where exactly the story went. I will say, like, if you want like a little bit of a teaser, this is like a minor spoiler. I'll put up a banner. It's very cosmic horror. And if you're wondering how we get from OCD to cosmic horror, that's the interesting part. And like just seeing what this guy was doing and what appears when he does it is very interesting, and I just have a blast with this story every time I read it. Definitely one of my all-time favorite Stephen King novellas. In is definitely very creepy. It's very good, and like I said, I have a hard time trying to talk about it because I don't want to give too much away. But yeah, if anything I said is of interest of you, please go check out In from Just After Sunset. Terrific novella. I hope it will get in some sort of adaptation one day, because I want to see what it looks like. But yeah, I'm going to go with N for number 10 on my list. And number 9, we're actually delving into my favorite Stephen King novella collection. Even though we've talked about a bunch of novellas so far, we haven't hit this collection yet. And spoiler alert, all the novellas in this collection are going to be in the top 10 because it's one of my favorite Stephen King books of all time. And of course, I'm talking about different seasons. But which one am I talking about? Which one is my least favorite in this collection? Might come as a shock to some people because a lot of people really love this novella. But for me, even though like I love all of these novellas, but one of them has to be worse than the others, right? But for me, coming in at number 9 is The Body. Like I said, it's a terrific novella. I love the story. It's one of the best coming-of-age tales Stephen King has ever written. Just, flat out one of the best coming-of-age stories ever. And terrific cast of characters, the 4 young boys that we follow, going on their journey to find this dead body that they've heard of. It's just so good, and it's written very well. It's very well paced. It has one of my favorite tropes of stories within a story of like this guy who wants to be, or this kid who wants to be a writer one day, like just sitting around, in the woods with his friends telling this story. And that's one of my favorite parts of the novella. It's just so good. But like I said, Different Seasons is my all-time favorite Stephen King novella collection. And the 3 other ones are also going to be in the top 10 somewhere on the list. But yeah, number 9 is The Body. Very simple concept, very well executed. Just 4 boys, coming-of-age tale. Let's go find a dead body. And yeah, I love it. So yeah, number 9 is The Body. And number 8 on this list, we've had a few of the novellas from this collection already in the list. They came in the previous episodes. This is the last one in the collection, and it's from Full Dark No Stars, and the novella is 1922. So like the title of the novella collection suggests, Full Dark No Stars, all of the stories in here are very dark, very gruesome, and especially so with this first one in the collection, 1922. It's very dark, but also at the same time, the reason why I love it more than the others is that depending on what kind of mood you're in when you read it, at least for me, I might be crazy, but, well, I am crazy. But depending on what kind of mood you're in when you read it, you can either read it as very dark and very scary and very just, menacing, or you can kind of read it as a dark comedy, because the first time I read it, I definitely read it more as like, oh shit, this is terrifying and very gruesome and scary. The second time, though, I listened to it on audio, and I don't remember who the narrator was, but the way he portrayed everything, for me, it felt like a dark comedy, even though there were terrible things happening. I thought it was darkly funny, which is probably not the reaction King was going for, but I thought it was great. So I love stories where you can either watch it kind of in a more serious way or in a comedic way. I tend to watch like American Horror Story that way. Like you can either watch it as like you're taking it seriously or you're just like, this is fucking stupid, right? But yeah, 1922, I guess I should probably say what the story is about. But also I don't want to give too much away because it's a great tale. But essentially, it's called 1922 because that's the year it takes place in the 20s. And you've got this wife and husband, and they're both on this farmland, and they've got their son. So the wife and husband are having marital issues, and they live on this farm, right? And, the husband, wants to stay on the farm, and the wife kind of wants to sell the farm and, like, move to the city, and they're having marital issues because of that. So what does the husband want to do? Well, let's kill the wife. Let's kill the wife. And then he kind of wants to bring his son into it, and of course the son's like, well, I don't want to leave the farm, but I don't want to kill my my mom. Like, yeah, it's very, very dark stuff, but I thought it was kind of funny. But yeah, it's just seeing the direction it goes in, and then after something happens, like seeing the aftermath of everything. It's really well told, very well paced. And I will say, like, for a Stephen King novella, this does read like a Richard Bachman tale. Like, if he was still publishing under Richard Bachman, he could have published this as a Richard Bachman novel if he would have, like, delved a little bit more into it and made it like a novel. It could have been a really good Richard Bachman tale. It's definitely my favorite in the collection. And then the other one in here, actually, if you're curious, because usually Stephen King novellas have, or novella collections have 4 novellas. There's Fair Extension in here, which is very good, but it's only like 30 pages, so I count that more as a short story. It's really good, but if you're wondering why that's not going to be on the list, I think of it more as a short story. 1922, my number 8 spot for Stephen King novellas. I love it because depending on what kind of mood I'm in, I can either read it as like a straight up horror or a little bit as a horror comedy. Let me know what you guys think. If you've read this before, what do you guys think about that? Am I crazy? Well, yes, but let me know what you guys think about that. But anyway, let's move on. 1922 is number 8 on the list. And number 7 on the list, another entry from different seasons. This one might also come as a shock to some people because it's very well known. It's obviously one of Stephen King's best stories he ever told. It has a movie adaptation that's one of the best movies ever made. But for me, there's just 6 more novellas that I enjoy slightly more. And so for number 7, I'm going to go with Rita Hayworth in Shawshank Redemption. So like I said, it's obviously one of Stephen King's best novellas ever. One of the greatest stories he's ever told. But for me, I like the movie more because it's so faithfully adapted, and the director, like, brings out more of the story. Like, he adds extra scenes in it that, like, enhance the story for me, that whenever I go to read it, I always enjoy it. I've read it about 2 or 3 times now, but I just enjoy the movie more. So it's like, well, you can either read the novella, which will take about, I don't know, 4 or 5 hours. It's like a little over 100 pages or so, or just watch the perfect movie with Morgan Freeman. So I know that's not fair, but that's how my mind works. You know, I had the same issue kind of with The Green Mile, which is also another Stephen King prison story, where, like, the book is great, like, it's one of his best books, but the movie is equally as good, and it's a 3-hour movie versus reading the book in, like, I don't know, 9-10 hours or so. I don't know. But like I said, Shawshank Redemption, obviously one of Stephen King's best novellas. I love it. I love the character of Andy Dufresne. I love Red. I'm sure most of you guys know what the Shawshank Redemption is about. But yeah, I really like it. But surprisingly enough, there are 6 more novellas that I like more. So yeah, I'm going to go with Shawshank Redemption for number 7. And number 6, this is probably going to be the one that would piss off people the most because a lot of people hate this book. And I say book because he published it as a novel, but it reads like a novella, and it's short enough that I consider it a novella. It's easily one of the least popular Stephen King books. People don't like it. They don't like how it ends. I couldn't disagree more. I love this book, this novella, whatever you want to call it. So number 6 is The Colorado Kid. I love this book. I've read it 3 times now, I believe, and it's just so good. And I really don't understand why people hate it as much as they do. And I get people don't like the ending, right? Because essentially what you get with this story is you get the main character is this young journalist woman, and she's talking to these two older gentlemen who have been, in this area. I think it's on like an island in the Northeast or something, and they're basically just talking about the history of the town and like news articles that they've written about over the years. And then they stumble upon this case, the Colorado kid, and they start talking about it, and she's trying to like pry into it and ask questions about this case. And it's a cold case that was never solved. There's no solution to it. And she's trying to pick it apart to see if she can maybe, crack it. But of course, these two older gentlemen have been, dealing with it for years, and they've been thinking about it and just contemplating everything. And the story basically ends with, they're, you have all the facts, but there's no solution. And the mystery is left unresolved. And people hate that, but I love it because that's the moral of the story, is that you're not always going to get all the answers. And life is too messy for that. And that's literally like what they say is like, people don't want a story without an answer. They like a story, they're for their news stories anyway. Like they like to be wrapped up and for it to be clean. But for this story about the Colorado kid, about this guy that's found dead on a beach, they're trying to figure out who he is. They're trying to figure out what happened, and they're just never able to figure it out. And I love it. And I love the way he tells the story. I love the way it's written. I love it. And if you go on Goodreads, it's easily Stephen King's lowest rated book. I think it sits at like a 3.3, which is terrible for Goodreads. And I just could not disagree more. I love this novella so much. And whether you call it a novella or a short novel, whatever, I love it. And I hate that people don't like it as much as I do. But, I'll sit on the mountaintop by myself for now. If anyone else watching this video loves this book, loves this novella, please let me know. And I want to chat with you about it. And I want to, get my feelings out for, why I love it so much. But yes, I absolutely love it. But there are 5 more that I love more. But yes, The Colorado Kid, number 6. All right, so now we're on to my top 5. And if you're keeping track, like the good constant readers you are, you would notice that there are 2 stories left from different seasons, and there are 3 stories left from If It Bleeds. Now, in a previous episode, the novella that I had already included was the title story, If It Bleeds. I do really like it, but nowhere near as much as the other 3 novellas that are in this collection. So for number 5, I'm going to go with the first story that's included in this collection, Mr. Harrigan's Phone. So when I did my overall Stephen King ranking list, I had this book at number 4 on my list, which, for most people would be pretty shocking and pretty, really high on the list for some people. But for me, the story that I kind of told was that this was the first King book that I read after my dad died. And me and him were both huge Stephen King fans. And I was just kind of reading this book and just loving it and knowing how much that he would have loved, this book. And the first story in here is Mr. Harrigan's Phone. And when I read it, I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. And yeah, so this overall book just has a very special place in my heart for me. And then Mr. Harrigan's Phone is the first story in here, and it's essentially another kind of coming of age story where you get this young boy who befriends this elderly rich dude, and he gets paid to go to his house and read him stories. And it's a very simple concept, but you get a little further into it, and this wealthy guy gets very interested in his new iPhone, the boy's new iPhone. So this was written in the late 2000s, I believe. So right when the iPhone came out. And they get talking about that, and the old guy gets interested in that. And you just get this very interesting relationship with this young boy and this elderly guy. And then another reason why I like this book is because the the little boy's father, like they have a good relationship, like father-son relationship. And yeah, it's very well paced. And again, like you get further into the novella and more interesting stuff happens. I know what I'm probably saying isn't like terribly interesting, but you get a little bit further into it and something happens and then something else happens, and it's very well told, it's very well paced, very well executed. I've read it twice now. I had to reread it for the novella ranking, and I had a blast even though I already knew what was going to happen. So yes, it has a very special place in my heart, and I love it. Definitely, if you haven't read If It Bleeds yet, highly recommend it, and it starts off with a very good one. So yes, Mr. Harrigan's Phone is number 5 on the list. And then number 4 for my ranking also comes from If It Bleeds. And it is actually the last novella in the collection, simply titled Rat. It's funny because when I initially came up with my overall ranking of like, okay, this is probably where all of the novellas are gonna lie, I essentially went back and reread all of his novellas just to double check that I had all of them in the correct order. And for Rat, I had it way lower. Well, not way lower. It was still in my top 10. But I had it probably at number 10 or number 9, like somewhere in that range. But the second time reading it, I had a blast. I really, really enjoyed it. I loved how dark it got. I loved the pacing. I loved the character. And it deals with another writer character because, of course, Stephen King just can't help himself with writing, writers as main characters, obviously. But yes, you get this character, and he's a writer, but he's never been able to write a full-length novel. It's never gone well, but he does write short stories, and he does have a decent, enough time getting his short stories published and writing those. But for this novella, he actually comes up with like his big novel, like his idea, and he can like picture all of it in his head. And he's got that idea, and he tells his wife like, look, I gotta go away for a couple weeks. Like, I'm gonna go to our cabin, or like the family cabin or whatever, and just like get it done. I really need to just like get it out of my system and just write it, because I know I'll be able to write it this time. So he goes and does that, and I don't know how much else I want to tell y'all because it's really good. And it's called Rat, and there is a rat in the story, and I don't know. But yeah, that's the general idea, is you get this writer who gets this brilliant idea, epiphany for a novel, goes to a cabin to go write it, something happens in the cabin, and there's a rat involved. That's all you need to know. That's all I'm going to say. But yes, I loved it even more the second time through, even though I already knew what was going to happen. It was so well done, so well executed. I loved it so much. And yeah, I was pleasantly surprised that it made my top 5 list, because it wasn't originally where I was going to go, but when I read it, I was like, oh yeah, I'm loving this so much. Yeah, I'm going to go with Rat for number 4. And now we have 3 left. Yeah, getting very excited to talk about my 3 favorite novellas, y'all. Okay, so for number 3, it is also from different seasons, but which novella is it going to be? It is going to be Apt Pupil for number 3 on the list. So for me, Different Seasons was one of the very first King books I read. I think it was like one of the first 5 or 10 books or so that I've read by him. I've since read all of his books, if you haven't noticed. But yeah, so Different Seasons was one of the first. And so when I initially read it, the first story in here is Shawshank Redemption, which of course I had seen the movie several times growing up, and I had basically, I knew what was going to happen. But with Apt Pupil, like, even though I saw the movie, I saw it like once maybe, and it wasn't that great. and I had forgotten about it by the time I read this in college. But when I started reading it, like it just blew me away with how good it was and just how interesting it was. And if you don't know the general premise of the story, you essentially get this young boy who finds out that this guy in his neighborhood is a runaway Nazi. And he finds this out, and initially when you're first reading it, you're like, okay, well, what's he going to do with this information? Like, because you find out that he wants to blackmail him. But, you know, the way that he blackmails him and what he wants in exchange of not giving away his identity is pretty crazy, because you're just like, okay, well, maybe he wants money, or he wants, you know, some kind of valuable thing, right? But what he wants is instead is he wants this ex-Nazi, this runaway Nazi, war criminal, right? He wants him to tell him all of the grisly details that happened in the concentration camps. So the dynamic between the two characters is very interesting because, of course, you've got this horrible monster, this Nazi, right, who escaped and is like living his everyday life, and he performed stuff in concentration camps, right? And like, so he's obviously a terrible person. But then you've got this fucked up kid who's, you know, he probably should just go and tell the authorities, right? Like, look, I have clear information here that says that this guy is a Nazi. Like, go arrest him, right? But no, he blackmails him, and he doesn't even want money. He wants to know more about all the terrible stuff that he did during the war. So both characters are very just not good people, obviously, but just it's just such an interesting dynamic, right? And that's why I loved it so much. It's so interesting to like just have two people that are deplorable, and just the direction that it goes in after that. Very good, and obviously one of my favorite Stephen King novellas because of that. And yes, even though I read it the second time, because it's been years since I read it the first time, I reread it for the ranking, and I had just as much fun as I did the first time. Very well told. And also, another point, like with 1922, I said that felt like a Richard Bachman novella. This would have been like the ultimate Richard Bachman novella. Like, I'm surprised, because this came out in 1982. I'm surprised that King didn't just straight up make that a Richard Bachman novel. Like, it's long enough, like maybe he could have added like 30 more pages or so. Like, he could have published that as a Richard Bachman novel, and it would have done very well. And yes, one of my favorite Stephen King novellas of all time. Let me know what you guys think of it. And yeah, Apt Pupil, number 3 on the list. All right, so now we're at the top 2. And obviously for you constant readers who know which 2 novellas are coming next, if you've watched the rest of my ranking series, once I reveal one, you're going to know what the number 1 spot is, so that'll be fun. But yes, for number 2, it is the last one that I haven't talked about in If It Bleeds. And the story that I'm talking about, of course, is The Life of Chuck. This one is very hard to talk about, especially the way that it's written. I really don't want to give too much away. But what I will say, it is by far the most uniquely told novella that King has ever written. Very fresh, very original. I really loved it, obviously, because it's number 2 on my list. But essentially, you get a novella that's told in 3 parts, but it's told backwards. So part 1 is like the end, and then part 2 flash back a little bit, and then part 1 you flash back even more. So it's told in a very non-linear way, which of course, that's one of my favorite writing tropes, is when, you know, writers write in non-linear formats. That's why something like The Lies of Locke Lamora is like one of my all-time favorite fantasies is because it just constantly flips back and forth between the present and the past. But yeah, The Life of Chuck is amazing because of that. I don't really want to give away what happens necessarily, because it's, like I said, it's definitely one of those novellas you want to go into it knowing as little as possible. But maybe like the part one, I guess I could say that it starts with essentially you're following this character and seemingly like the end of the world is happening. And you're initially intrigued because you're like, okay, well, why is the world ending? And then this character named Chuck keeps popping up. And you're just like, okay, well, who is Chuck? And, you know, you get a little further into it and it's just, it's hard to describe how beautiful it is and haunting it is. But then in part two, and like I said, it's told backwards. Part two, like I said, I don't want to give too much away. But for me, I'm definitely a little biased when it comes to this story because it has a drummer character, which Stephen King, you know, he has had musicians in his stories before, but this was like straight up like a drummer POV, and like you get perspectives of him like actually drumming like on a street corner and like him drumming. So like I definitely got tickled by when I was reading that when it first came out a couple years ago. So yeah, that's definitely a huge reason why I love this story. Not the only reason, of course, but I am definitely biased because I don't know if other people, you know, if they were to do a novella ranking, I don't know if they would put this story as high as I do. But yes, I absolutely love this novella. Everything in it works for me. It's perfect. I realize that I'm just gushing at this point, but yes, please, just overall, if you have not read this collection, I highly recommend it. All of the novellas are great. So yeah, number 2, I'm going to go with The Life of Chuck. So obviously I only have one novella left for my top spot, my all-time favorite Stephen King novella. What's it going to be? So my number 1 Stephen King novella of all time is The Breathing Method. And The Breathing Method is the very last final novella in Different Seasons. Like I said, my all-time favorite Stephen King novella collection. And The Breathing Method, it's one of those novellas, one of those stories where like I still remember reading it for the first time and just how shocked I was by the ending. Like my jaw was just on the floor. Like just reading that last scene is just like, it's just one of those scenes that like is never gonna leave my mind. Like it's forever imprinted into my mind, unforgettable. So the premise of The Breathing Method is that you get these group of guys that are in this club, in this bar, and they just kind of sit around and tell each other stories. And the main story that gets told in the bar is like what takes up the majority of this novella. And it's just unforgettable. And I don't want to give too much away, but essentially you get this pregnant lady in, I can't remember what decade it is. Might have been like the 20s or the 30s, but you know, she's pregnant, but she doesn't have a husband, so she's kind of shunned by society, and she's, you know, having to go to this doctor. And yeah, the story that's told, and like I said, just the ending of it is just something that I'll never forget. And that's the main reason why it's number 1, is just for the ending, but also just the way that the novella is told. I love it. So, and like I said, I don't want to give too much away, but you know, if you know that the story is about a pregnant lady and the story is called The Breathing Method, it's crazy. But for me, like, it's definitely Stephen King's most underrated novella ever. And when I, you know, first read this collection, I knew going into it that Shawshank Redemption, I knew it was going to happen. Apt Pupil, even though, like, I kind of forgot a lot of it, I still remembered, like, the general premise, so I wasn't too shocked by anything that happened, even though I still loved the novella. And then the body, of course, you know, Stand By Me, one of the best movies ever, terrific adaptation. I knew essentially what was going to happen. But the breathing method has no adaptation, which I think it should. I think it would be really cool. And so I definitely went into that novella knowing absolutely nothing. And I still remember reading it for the first time and just being so utterly shocked by the ending. And it was so good. And yeah, it's my favorite novella. And I will be honest though, I had a really hard time trying to decide between the breathing method and the Life of Chuck, because I remember reading the Life of Chuck and I was like, this might be my favorite Stephen King novella ever. But after rereading the breathing method for this ranking, I have a really hard time knocking it down. So yeah, the breathing method has to be number one for me. So yep, the breathing method, my favorite Stephen King novella ever. Okay, so that is my Stephen King top 10 novella list. Now, let's see if I can run this down by memory here. So number 10 is In from Just After Sunset. Number 9 is The Body from Different Seasons. Number 8 is 1922 from Full Dark No Stars. Number 7 is the Rita Hayworth and Shawshank Redemption from Different Seasons. Number 6 is The Colorado Kid, which I'm very interested to see what people think about that. Number 5 is Mr. Harrigan's Phone from If It Bleeds. Number 4 is Rat from If It Bleeds. Number 3 is Apt Pupil from Different Seasons. Number 2 is Life of Chuck from If It Bleeds. And then number 1, my all-time favorite Stephen King novella, is The Breathing Method from Different Seasons. That's my top 10 list. And thank you guys so much for being patient with me with this series. The series has kind of been up and down of just like me taking forever to get these episodes out. Like I initially wanted to do one every 2 weeks, but sometimes I just got distracted either by life or just, you know, whatever. But thank you for sticking with me. And if you're watching this, thank you so much. And like I said, this is the last episode in the ranking series. And if you're watching this and you haven't seen the rest of the series, I'll of course link the playlist down below. And you guys can see what I ranked number 33, which is last, which, spoiler alert, it's Elevation. Piece of shit. And then, so from 33 all the way up to this episode, yeah, I had a fun time ranking all of these. And just in summation, I love Stephen King novellas. I think Stephen King is at his absolute best when writing novellas, or at least his most consistently best, right? Because he has great short stories, but he has a lot of bad ones. He has great novels, but he has a few bad ones. But for novellas, I mean, besides Elevation, like, they're all worth reading, and they're all at least good. And definitely, like, his top novellas are just some of the best writing he's ever done. I absolutely love his novellas. If I get anything out of this series, I want people to go check out his novellas. So hopefully I've convinced some of y'all watching to go check out some of his novella collections, especially my two favorites, which are in my top 10 books, Stephen King books of all time, If It Bleeds and Different Seasons. But anyway, please let me know what you guys thought of my rankings for not only this episode, but just for the entirety of my ranking list. Please let me know what you guys think, and let me know what your top 10 Stephen King novellas are. What are your all-time favorite Stephen King novellas? What are your all-time least favorite Stephen King novellas? Which ones do you think are underrated? Which ones do you think are overrated? Please leave all of that for me to discuss with you guys down in the comments below. And of course, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to my YouTube channel and the Bookish Drummer Discord. And if you'd like to further support me financially, go check out my Patreon page and see what that's all about. Thank you guys again for being patient with me on this series. I'm glad that I finally got it finished and that I got to talk about my all-time favorite Stephen King novellas. Thank you guys so much.